Greetings to the Scouts of the Inter-America region. My name is Brendan Hausberger, and I have the privilege of serving the Scouts of South Africa in making the world a better place. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the growth models we have tested and tried, and some of the successes that my team have been able to deliver working with the young people in South Africa. Some background to this might be interesting to yourselves. In 2011, Scouts South Africa had just over 12,000 members, and in 2017 we'd managed to grow that to just over 197,000 Scouts. This change was achieved through a process of effectively modifying the organization to lay the appropriate foundations for this growth. The changes we made include simplifying our overall organizational structure, adapting our youth programs so that they were both more relevant to our youth members, but also were more accessible so that members didn't need access to resources to be able to interact with or achieve the various progress levels. We worked significantly on marketing the organization, both to raise the profile in the general public and with various funders and supporters, but also to make youth aware of what we were doing. And we managed to create a tracking database which allows us to monitor and evaluate where we are going with the growth. In achieving this growth, we had a number, but there are 4 specific growth models that I want to talk to you about today. The first growth model was one that we did in KwaZulu-Natal, down on the southeast coast of South Africa. This was done through a partnership with the Department of Education, whereby we got scouting recognized as an extramural sport activity at schools. We recruited teachers and educators to be the adult leader volunteers to drive and run the programs. And the recruitment method we made use of was going to district meetings of the principals where a presentation on scouting was made. The principals then identified teachers who they thought would be appropriate and relevant to work with us. We then had 4-day stage 1 and stage 2 wood badge training, and by the evaluation of the volunteers on that training, we were able to identify those who would be suitable scouters. Once the scouters had actually been in place after 3 to 4 months, we did follow-up training and continued the stage 2 training to fully qualify the scouters. The wins of this was that we had incredibly fast growth. We put 140% growth nationally in 1 year through scouting. There is tremendous visibility and impact on the ground, which is very visible to the society. We've been able to sustain the membership of this exercise, but what has arisen through the interactions is that our more conventional scouts, who were community groups that were not involved in the schools, did tend to have conflict with the school groups in that there were very different models of operating. Some of the challenges were that many of the people we recruited through this program had a very poor background in terms of scouting skills, and that meant there was extra skills training that was required. And further, there was a feeling that the scouting we were doing was not pure scouting, in that many of the activities that were being undertaken in the schools were not the traditional pioneering and camping activities, but still utilized the scout method of small groups. This, for many of our traditional scouters, was a bit of a challenge. We also found that with this explosive growth, the span of control of our district commissioners and regional team to be able to support the scouters on the ground was stretched to almost breaking point. The other objective which came up was the use of paid teachers as scouters did lead to some conflict with our volunteers around access to resources. The other challenge we found that was having enough trainers to be able to deal with the number of teachers who came into the program meant that in some cases the training was perhaps not done to the same extent and degree we would have liked to have had it done. The second model we did was the development of community groups, which we carried out in Gauteng. Now, in Gauteng, what we did was we took our current existing standard model and we tried to roll it out in our poorer, lower resource township communities. We made use of the existing training team and programs and activities, and we tried to merge the leadership from the new groups that we created into the existing structure. The adult recruitment, just like scouting in many parts of the world, was through volunteers, parents or ex-scouts who lived in those areas, and we tried to do the recruitment of adults from the same communities where the youth were coming from. If we look at the wins and the challenges in Gauteng, we were able to double the numbers in the province within 6 months, and it was very easy because we were building on the existing scouting infrastructure. In addition, the actual skills that were being done were what people would have referred to as real scouting. However, the challenges were that we effectively ended up creating a parallel structure. It was very much based around the individual who was the champion of the project. And the lack of resources meant that the current program we were running at that point in time was not effective, as many of the young people were not able to actually achieve the training and complete the advancement program degree they would have. Ultimately, when the champion for the project departed from scouting due to a work reallocation, suddenly the entire structure collapsed in on itself. One of the other models we've worked with is a non-governmental organization partnership, which is something we attempted in Limpopo. Limpopo is a fairly rural province of South Africa, and this was predominantly scouting being carried out in very poor areas in no-fee and low-fee paying school areas. Here we had an NGO that was working in the area that was looking for a youth program. They identified scouting as being what they believed the most suitable youth program to work with. The program was run in afternoons in the actual communities being served, and the home-based carers who were employed by the NGO were being used and were trained as the adult leaders. These paid field workers then, in the fullness of time, became district commissioners and supported the scouters on the ground. The training was done in the normal scouting training format of stage 1 and stage 2 training, but the format had to be modified as we were traveling vast distances to bring the scouters together for the training, which meant that in many cases, instead of doing 2 weekends that might be separated by some time, the training took place in 1 4 or 5 day course. This arrived at a very well structured and administered operation, largely due to the cooperation with the NGO. We achieved a high quality of both training of both adults and youth. The operation has shown to be both stable and sustainable in terms of numbers, both of adults and youth members. And because of the insights and the impact assessment that the NGO does, we were able to get very good feedback both on our programs as well as issues around our structure we need to address. However, it did come with some challenges. Working with another NGO meant that there was competition for fundraising or funds for activities. And we did find on occasion that the NGO chose what parts of the program they wished to emphasize, which in some cases led to some conflicts around making sure the program was fully realized and adopted. The latest model we've been working on is scouting in schools, which is something we've done in the Western Cape. This was a part of the Western Cape government's after-school game changer program. Scouting was recognized as an extramural activity in the schools, and we were able to train unemployed young people from the communities to become adult leaders for 1 year. These young leaders are paid a stipend for a period of 1 year, after which, if they wish to continue, they may do so as volunteers. The adult recruitment was done through schools recommending school leavers from the previous year as well as advertisements. We then held a weekly training session with the young people, and we found that with an accelerated training program, within 6 weeks, we were able to deliver programs to both packs and troops within these very poor communities. Some of the challenges, having the adult leaders for only 1 year did mean that if the adult leader did not choose to stay on as a volunteer, there were questions around the sustainability of a group. And we also found that the running of these groups required, because of the skills level of the new volunteers coming on board, a lot more support. So things like programs on a plate had to be delivered for the scouters. The wins were the weekly mentoring and training did mean that we were able to identify issues with individual scouters and address them before they became problems. And we were able to show that there's a distinct benefit not only to the young people through the program, but also to the adults, which creates a very interesting opportunity for scouting in that while we see ourselves as a movement for youth, the young adults that we were working with through this, who would be between the ages of 18 and 23, were also being developed. And some of the stats I show here, 10% of the young adults went on to study, 30% were able to find employment, and this led to 38% growth in the region. Just to give you a sense, this is an area where the youth unemployment is upwards of 60% in this particular age range. So this is quite a significant impact. What we can tell you is this. If you want to create an enabling growth environment, you need to simplify your adult recruitment, but make sure you've got the appropriate security checks in place to keep things safe for the youth members. Your youth programs have got to be relevant and accessible to all of your members. You need to relook at your training tools. You can't just use the same old-fashioned courses. Sometimes you need to use different ways of preparing and training the material and understand that some of your new recruits may come from a background where they do not have scouting skills. We are in the process of introducing an ECD program to create a continuation and be able to recruit in our more affluent areas. And we found that our standard support structures can support around about 10% annual growth. If we go greater than that growth rate, you need to put measures in place to be able to support that. Some of the lessons we've learned: growth is not just about increasing your numbers. The fact that you are actually doing something meaningful in the lives of the young people you're working with is important too. We would easily be able to double our numbers overnight, but we would not be able to deliver a useful, meaningful program to those young people, or we would lose them fairly quickly. Achieving the youth growth is relatively simple in most countries, but finding the adults who will sustain and support that growth is a much harder objective. The other thing we've learned is even within our provinces, there is no one-size-fits-all model. You need to look at what the growth strategy is that's going to work in a particular region and modify and adjust it to meet the needs of that particular region. An affluent, well-resourced community makes it much easier to find kids who want to participate, but your adults are typically fairly busy at work. A poorer community with unemployment may have lots of adults, but they may not have the resources to do scouting. And in that light, I think the next point around the growth structure and strategy, having to accept the realities, is very important. You need to understand what resources the volunteers you are seeking to recruit have and how best to use those for scouting, and understanding how your support and training program is going to need to be adjusted for that particular recruitment area. For example, in one of our provinces, people were traveling over 4 hours to come to a training session. And that meant that if you wanted to have regular meetings with those individuals, you had to make allowance for that additional travel time for those people. We've also learned that any growth initiative really does need a champion, somebody who's going to drive it, wave the flag, and identify the problems and champion your way through those issues. But if you make it all about the individual, you can run into difficulties if that individual for some reason is no longer available. And at some point in any growth strategy, there does need to be a transition from that individual's project to being part of the overall organization. And I think I could summarize this all as saying growth is easy, but sustainable growth takes a lot more work. If you've got any more questions, please feel free to mail us and look at our website and get some information there. We're more than willing to assist you however we can. Good luck in your growth strategy. We're continuing to grow and learn, and we'd love to hear about some of your lessons. Good scouting.